Mayor, we'll be going live in just a minute. We are live now.
Thank you. Good evening and welcome to a special meeting called to order, a special meeting of the Normal Town Council for Wednesday, September 2nd, 2020. Please call the roll.
Mayor Kus,
Here.
Mr. McCarthy,
Here.
Ms. Cummings, here, Mr. Nord,
Here.
Ms. Smith,
Here.
Mrs. Lorenz,
Here.
Mr. Preston.
Here. We'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. First order of business is public comment. We have 3 commenters tonight.
Mr. Mayor, if I may interrupt, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, you're right. Thank you. I have to state this at every remote meeting we do. The governor has issued a disaster declaration related to public health concerns caused by the state COVID-19 pandemic. As mayor, I've determined an in-person meeting is no longer practical or prudent because of the risk of exposure to the COVID-19 virus stemming from an indoor gathering, and that remote meeting is the best interest in the health, safety, and welfare of the council, the staff, and the general public. And now we go to public comment. Our first commenter is Fusan Akman, and we have to wait just a moment or two until he gets patched in, he or she gets patched in. Are you there?
I have added him to the call, just waiting.
Okay, is this better?
Oh, here we are.
Thank you.
Please state your name for the record, and you have 3 minutes for public comment.
Thank you so much. Good evening. I'm Füsun Akman. I've been living in this community and teaching at ISU. For
Ms. Akman, if you could turn your volume up, I don't think people can hear you.
Hello?
Yes.
I've been living.
Are you there? I'm going to give her just a moment more before we move on to the next commenter. Ms. Akman?
Yes.
Please go ahead. Ms. Akman, I'm going to ask you to, I'm going to put you at the end of the list here until we can figure out this audio situation, but we can barely hear your voice. So I'm going to move to the next public commenter and we'll come back to you. Our next commenter is Brian Rejak.
I've added Mr. Reject.
Can you all hear me now?
We can, Mr. Rejak. Please state your name for the record, and you have 3 minutes to make comment.
Okay, thanks for allowing me to speak. My name is Brian Rejak. I'm a resident of Normal, and I teach in the English department at ISU. So, as you might imagine, I've been following the coronavirus news a bit obsessively since our semester began 2 weeks ago. And since the spring, I was very clear about my position in favor of ISU remaining fully online for the fall 2020 semester. But even so, I'll be honest, I really didn't think it would get this bad this quickly. The town of Normal and Illinois State University are in a crisis, and we need to act like it. I've made my case to the ISU administration multiple times through multiple channels. But I'm speaking here today because, unfortunately, ISU has yet to take significant steps to slow and stop this outbreak, and I hope that the town will step up and do so. 5% of our student population has tested positive in just over 2 weeks. The 7-day positivity rate for ISU is at 24.2%. We just pause a moment and let that sink in. That number is not an aberration. There have been over 5,000 tests, and 1,110 of them have come back positive. That's a large enough sample size for us to trust that the positivity rate is not due to some flaw in the data. And let's also remember that we're talking about the lives of over 1,000 people. While young people do fare better with COVID as compared with other age groups, they can still face a variety of severe consequences from having the disease, including long-term health issues that we still don't fully understand, and yes, even death. The current ISU strategy amounts to this: let the virus spread and hope for the best. But hope is not a public health strategy. I hope that our numbers start going down and keep going down in the coming days and weeks. But based on the evidence that we have, and based on what we know about how this virus works, we're already behind the game. Lagging indicators like the 6 new hospitalizations in McLean County reported today are just starting to show us what is to come because of what we have and have not done over the past 2 weeks. Now, I'm sure that all of you have a much better idea than I do regarding what the town can do at this point, but I'll offer a few suggestions by way of concluding. Close down bars and indoor dining. Urge the ISU administration to close residence halls, to have all off-campus students shelter in place for at least 2 weeks, following the model the U of I announced just earlier this afternoon. And communicate to the people of the town that we are in a crisis and that the only way out is to take serious action. However, we cannot rely solely on individual responsibility. We need institutions, civic and otherwise, to establish the conditions under which the virus will stop spreading so rapidly. Thank you.
Mayor, I'm sorry, you were muted, Mayor Coos.
Our next speaker is Chris Masek, and I hope I said that name right. If you would bring him in.
Mr. Masek is in.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you quite well, thank you. If you'd
Okay, great.
If you'd state your name for the record, and you have 3 minutes for public comment.
Yeah, hi, my name is Chris Masek, and I'd like to comment on the ordinance regarding meetings of 10 people or more. First, I'd like to just say that I do appreciate your time and effort for the members that sit on this council. I do realize it comes out of a position of empathy, care, and desire to do what's best for this community. So don't let my comments misconstrue my gratitude for the time that you've all committed here. Specifically in the regards to the meetings of 10 or more, I do question where this decision does come from. What does the data show us, say, for meetings of, I don't know, 8, 9, 11, 12, et cetera? What has the medical community consensus been that we're following for this? How has this proposal worked in other parts of the country or in the world? And is it your responsibility to be limiting the activities of those that are in fact educated on the risk of COVID and have made the voluntary decision to come back, say, to the university in person rather than online? I don't think at this time in the world we live in, there is a lack of information or being able to access that information. How is it that we live in a community where up to 500 people can gather in Menards or other stores deemed essential, but gatherings of 10 or more are going to result in a fine? Many of those stores result in the shoppers being at distances much closer than gatherings of 10 plus that you are targeting, or even the bars and restaurants that are being targeted as well. And let me remind you, those individuals in the stores and the bars, restaurants, and gatherings of 10 or more are all doing so voluntarily, knowing the risks of COVID. We are also living in a time of a mask mandate. If masks actually work, which I would challenge you to find even the transmission rates among those wearing masks, say in hospitals, community centers, or even your local COVID testing centers, then those that are most at risk should be choosing to wear the mask and distance and should not be dependent on the government to so-called protect them. While you members were elected to represent the people in the community, that election was not based on your competence as a decision maker for individuals or public health. The proposals in question are not undoubtedly in the best interest of the individuals that you are set to represent. In fact, the medical community does not have a consensus agreement at this time. Requirements for mask mandates and social distances were set out to help lessen the burden on the local community hospitals. And even though the positivity rate has gone from 4 to 8% in McLean County, and in subgroups up to 25%, are the hospitals being overrun? Recently, also in that 25% subgroup, we have seen the CDC recommend a halt on tests for students that are not testing or not symptomatic, which then would retroactively make that 25% positivity rate decrease significantly. I'd also like the council to address whether, if this ordinance was to move forward, would the gatherings of 10 or more be fined for things like peaceful protests and political rallies? If the council does decide to move forward with this in the best interest of public health, may we consider a few additional public health items? Seeing it there are more public health concerns that are much more well documented and serious than COVID, maybe we should take a look at things like heart disease, diabetes or obesity, along with things like anxiety and depression, which have been directly linked to poor eating habits that often lead to these diseases, like I just mentioned. Shall we issue fines for patrons who exceed their daily recommended caloric intake, sugar or carbohydrate intake? Shall we consider fines for those smoking within a few hundred feet of non-consenting members of the community? Shall we issue mandates for exercise programs and time spent outside, as those activities would have a much greater impact on the communities you represent than what is being mandated with COVID-19? Finally, I just have one more sentence. I ask, is it the responsibility of government to add more laws and rules to quote unquote protect us, or is it up to the members of the community to make the decisions based on the information they have? Thank you.
Thank you. And our final commenter, if we can get her back on the line, is Fusun Akman.
Okay, is this better? I'm on speaker.
You're good now.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. I'm Fusun Akman. I've been living in this community and teaching at ISU for 16 years. As a math professor, I disagree with the previous speaker's math, and that's all I want to say about it. I'm grateful to the council that you are considering these measures. It's indeed not a matter of whether we should do something, it's a matter of aim and scope. I hope I can add some perspective. So let's talk about an ISU sorority. I won't give the name, but recently 31 students out of 35 tested positive, all but 4. The house is close to Fairview Park, well out of the parking impact zone. By all means, let's break up large crowds, but look, there's a blackout on infections at fraternities, which are considered off-campus housing. They say a majority of the cases are in off-campus housing, so the pandemic has nothing to do with campus. With numbers like 31 out of 35, I think ISU should close the dorms and fraternities like all other colleges. State Farm has just pushed its open office date to 2021. Unit 5 is closed. Why us? I believe finding the students you can catch is not going to solve our problems. These are all somebody's kids and deserve our protection, not punishment. ISU is responsible for bringing them to town. There are some quarantine rooms, but we are not told how many or where they are. Students who should be in quarantine sneak out for bathroom or food, of course. Some just give up and go home to infect their families in nearby towns. We should close campus and provide proper care to those who need it. It's a huge public health issue. Testing is the buzzword, but it doesn't prevent infections, and full testing is months away. Also, look at U of I. Today, they locked down for 2 weeks except for essential business. Their positivity rate was below 1%, ISU's above 24%. They could not contain their students despite twice weekly testing. The health and lives of ISU staff are also at risk. We are older, we live here, we are your neighbors, your family members. It's not disclosed whether the recent hospitalizations are among students or older folks. Staff are forced to work on campus but not given leave to get tested. The conditions are inhumane for some workers and unhealthy for the whole community. 1,000 Americans are dying every day from a preventable cause. We need to commit to a reasonable scientific plan locally. The Council is uniquely situated to collaborate with ISU and set some expectations. We are counting on you. Please keep up the good work, and thanks for listening.
We now go to our business at hand tonight. 2 ordinances for consideration. The first, an ordinance concerning maximum capacity and social distancing at parties and other gatherings. For a little background on this, I think I will start with the fact that I've had conversations with university community mayors to see what they're doing and some of the issues that they're facing. We are certainly not alone in the situations we're dealing with here at Illinois State University, and these are some of the techniques that other communities have done, and it's the reason I presented these 2 ordinances to you. They're pretty clear binary choices. We either do this or we don't do this. The reason for doing this is I'm trying with the help of the Normal Council to tamp this down a little bit if we can and try to reduce our positivity rate so that people can function. I'm worried that if we do not do this and our rate rises, that all businesses in our community will suffer, not just bars and restaurants and some off-campus student parties. It's going to be tough on everybody. There are businesses I know that are not license holders that have told me that if there's another shutdown, they'll never reopen. So this is kind of the impetus for what I'm trying to accomplish with these ordinances, and I hope you can join with me to do this because I think it's in the best interest of our community, given the situation we're facing. And so again, an ordinance concerning maximum capacity and social distancing at parties or other gatherings. Move for approval. Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Discussion. Hearing none, please call the roll.
Mayor, my hand's up.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Nord. I'm used to the old way here. I see that. Actually, Karen Smith her hand was up before yours, so I'll go to Karen first and then to you, Mr. Nord. Ms. Smith.
Thank you. I want to take an opportunity to rebut one of the commenters' claims about not taking any kind of action regarding this pandemic when we don't do that for obesity, diabetes, heart disease. He mentioned several other diseases. I have seen this argument in the past, and I want to point out that those are not contagious. You don't get diabetes from sitting next to somebody else who does have diabetes. You don't get heart disease by sitting next to somebody who has heart disease. This virus is a respiratory illness that spreads through the air, and that there is evidence that points to the effectiveness of masks and the distance that it is most contagious is the reason why the 6-foot distancing has been cited as a recommendation. And so I just want to make clear that while we are not health experts in a time of crisis, we are asked to think of what would serve our community well. And I know from looking through emails earlier in the year when business owners were very, very frustrated about having to shut down in an effort to block the spread of this disease initially, that restaurants had to throw out foods that they had because they wouldn't be able to sell it. In some cases, they were able to give it away and donate it or send it home with their staff. But if there's a need for businesses to cut back, especially restaurants, it is a hardship on them. And so in an effort to work together as a community and get through this together, that is part of the rationale for why we are taking this action. And I just wanted to go on the record to make that statement. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think, thanks for the idea that I should answer a question too. There was a question about free speech and the right of free speech and protests. This order does not affect that. That's covered in a larger laws that the federal government and the state government have passed. We're not going to disband any marches or protests that have issues with our current situations or political issues. Mr. Nord.
Thank you, Mr. Meyer. I got some overall questions before I get to the specific ordinance, but more process. You've enacted what, 10 emergency orders?
Mr. Nord, I'm going to stop you on that right now. This is a special meeting to deal with 2 ordinances. I'd be happy to talk process with you. You could bring it up in council comments at the next meeting. But because it is a special meeting, we have the business at hand on these 2 ordinances. So if you move on to your questions on the ordinances.
Okay, the question is, why are these emergency ordinances being treated differently than the previous 10?
I don't think they are, Mr. Nord.
The previous 10 did not require the council, and they didn't get reviewed by the council.
That's a question of process. Again, we're discussing an ordinance concerning maximum capacity and social distancing at parties and other gatherings. That is our topic here.
Okay, then I'd like to ask the town attorney why this is different, just as a point of order.
Point of order, Mayor. I'm going to object as well. This is off topic.
I'm calling a point of order.
Mr. Day.
What is your point of order, Mr. Nord?
That this process for these 2 emergency orders are different than the previous 10. What is it about these orders that makes them follow a different process?
I'm going to shut that down, Mr. Day. I'm just going to shut that down. We're not here to discuss the process or the difference of the orders. The item is an ordinance tonight. There is an ordinance before you to vote on.
Okay.
In terms of the point of order, while that's on the floor, Mr. Nord's question, that point of order would be out of order as it's not a process question. We have a point of order by Mr. McCarthy, I'm assuming as to germaneness of Mr. Nord's statements. That is subject to the ruling of the chair on the germaneness issue.
Well, I just like it on the record that I asked a question about the policy and the process of the town and that I was denied an answer. So I will move on with questions. So this ordinance, it's a health-related ordinance. The health department has authority and is responsible for these policies. Why is the council being asked to make a health-related decision? We don't have the expertise. Why are we being asked to make these decisions instead of the health department?
Because we chose to, Mr. Nord.
All right, well, I will be the first to say that I am not qualified to make a health-related decision and overrule the powers that are granted to the Department of Health. And
Again,
I think that we would be,
Order,
and I
order.
think that,
We're
and I
talking
think that this
about-
council,
we're talking about something other than the actual subject of this topic. This is none of this statement. It's all political talk and it has absolutely nothing to do with the actual subject at hand. If Mr. Nord doesn't like this and doesn't want to vote for it, he can vote no. But this has nothing and is not germane to the actual subject that we're here to vote on tonight. And he's wasting our time. He's wasting taxpayer time and taxpayer money instead of focusing on the subject at hand.
okay. What collaboration has been done with the Department of Health?
Again, point of order, germaneness.
This is a health-related decision, is absolutely germane that we question, are our health experts involved in this decision?
Mr. Nord, this was as I told you before, these two ordinances were presented to you based on discussions with the university mayors and communities in an attempt to try to slow down the spread of coronavirus in our community. So you have an ordinance, as Mr. McCarthy said before you. You can vote yes, you can vote no. That is certainly your right.
Okay, then I've got a question about the ordinance. The ordinance in 6.2, it says that, well, according to the ordinance, does this also apply to non-students, to a child's birthday, retirement party, Thanksgiving, even a political fundraiser at a local uptown restaurant? Because it just limits to 10. And what if a party, a student party, if they declare it to be a protest, then do we legally have the ability to go in and impose this? I mean, this just seems vague. Or if a family of 10 is having a barbecue, Mr. Day, is this something that's enforceable?
Yes, it is enforceable. With respect to whether it only applies to students, the answer to that would be no. We don't have laws particularly that would affect only students. It's geared towards some of the problem areas that we have been seeing, which is residential areas around the campus area and multifamily housing. To answer your question about fundraisers in restaurants, it would not apply to those, as it applies only to dwelling units, multifamily apartments, and dwelling units within the campus area zone. So it would not affect those.
Would it affect a Thanksgiving Day party?
No, Mr. Nord.
Child's birthday?
No, Mr. Nord, it would not.
Well,
Yeah,
it doesn't say it.
potentially, yes.
So it was in the-
Potentially it would, depending on who's at the party. I mean, if there's 10 people who live there in a house, then obviously, no, we're not going to go in and give somebody a $750 ticket for having 8 kids. But if you were to have a large gathering, a large party, then yes, it would affect that if you were in one of the residential areas that are affected under the ordinance.
Who makes the determination? Because
Of
this
what?
code is not, the code is not specific whether or not a Thanksgiving Day party is going to be in violation or not, or the number of, or who's in attendance. You know, you said we would not do this, but who is making that decision?
Whoever's
Because the ordinance
enforcing,
says we would.
whoever's enforcing the ordinance.
Okay, and who is it that enforces the ordinance?
Town officials.
Would that be the town council?
No, town council doesn't typically go out and write tickets for ordinance violations.
So who are the officials?
It would be most likely be police officers. It could be inspections department officials. There are other officials that this may apply to.
Okay, well, that should be made specific in this ordinance. Otherwise, we're putting something out that's very vague.
If I could
Um,
jump in, Mr. Norday, we do identify who the enforcement officers are. It's on page 2 of the ordinance. I don't have my packet numbered, but on page 2, it does say enforcement officers means any member of normal police, fire, or inspections, and then just continues on. So I don't believe it's vague. I think it is specific.
Okay. And then this ordinance gives one person unilateral authority to extend this. Is that right? According to section 7?
No, that is not accurate. Section 7, I believe, indicates when it terminates, there's a sunset provision. It indicates that the president of the Board of Trustees, which would be the mayor, has authority to rescind it early, not extend it, rescind it. So the mayor has authority to terminate it in advance of its sunset date.
Okay. I'm still unclear why this one expired. The original one expired after 48 hours. Why it didn't continue? Why is that? Does it have different text?
There
You're
was
back to process again, Mr. Nord.
Okay. My stance is that this decision should be in the hands of the Department of Health.
Thank you. Mr. McCarthy.
Thank you. Sorry, Mayor, taking a minute to unmute myself. Thanks to my colleague, Ms. Smith, for correcting some of the statements made by one of the commenters. I do want to make mention of that there is actually medical consensus on mask wearing and on hand washing as well. And although there has been some investigation in social distancing, it's actually about whether or not 6 feet is enough, rather than 6 feet is not good. And also, there was a statement made about our hospitals not being overrun. Actions like this one specifically are designed to keep our hospitals from calamity. It would be irresponsible of this body and anybody empowered to do anything in this situation to not act until our hospitals are overrun, with an uptick in hospitalizations and those being put on life-saving measures, respirators. To wait for that to expand before we choose to do anything in our community is irresponsible. And so I urge my fellow members to not sit on our hands in the face of that alike. And I do agree with Ms. Smith. None of the things that were the diseases that were cited by the speaker are communicable diseases, let alone spread by aerosolized droplets in a cloud, and are not contagious in any way. And so they fail to meet this analogous situation at all. To the matter more specifically, I think that, we're a body who has some ability to do something here. We're not the only agency or body that has a role to play or responsibility or the ability to do stuff, but we are one of them. And there's certainly an increase going on in our community. And as a small business owner, as a person who feels for and supports our small business, going backwards is not an option. We've seen recently, just yesterday, that Metro East was significantly penalized by the governor for not doing enough with their over 10% positivity rate, which we have. And so a community or an area that has a positivity rate like ours is being penalized by the governor and being put backwards in greater restrictions. And that is not a tenable solution for our community. We need to take action to show the governor and to take meaningful action that can help to stem this, or we're going backwards. And I don't want that for my business. I don't want it for anybody's business. I don't want that for our community. The economic health of McLean County and Bloomington Normal is at risk here. Make no mistake. That is what is at stake with our decisions. Again, we're not the only ones. I'm glad to see I happened to be able to sit in on an update by Levester Johnson from Illinois State University as part of a chamber event yesterday. And they've certainly taken some measures on campus. They've reached out and are working with rental housing owners to help shape and do what they can. And Illinois State University mentioned you, Mayor, specifically having conversations of how do all of these partners work together and play a role, because we all have to. And I think what this helps us do is, yes, ISU campus is one of the areas, and the students are the most significant population that seem to be affecting our rates right now. And so this is a very specific and surgical way to go about that. And I think it's a good first step, I'm going to say that, to try to de-densify potential problem areas in our community. It also gives clear guidelines about what we're expecting of our behavior of the students in our community. It also gives clear guidance to student housing owners about what we expect them to do in their private businesses with students that put community at risk, community economy, and community members that aren't affiliated with the university. And it's, again, a very specific measure to deal with a specific area. And then it places consequences specifically on the people who are doing the activities that are increasing our risk in the community. And I think this is an appropriate measure. Again, I believe it's a first step for us. I hope our community partners continue to support measures and activities that help keep us all safe. For those reasons and many more, I'm supportive of this one.
Mr. Preston.
Thank you, Mayor. Here. In McLean County, we have had 1,838 positive cases since mid-March. That is information that this entire community has been following daily. But of those 1,838, as of today, 1,023 are ISU students. It was recently attributed that about 80% of the ISU student positive COVID cases are students who live off campus in apartments and other off campus housing around campus, but not actually in university owned housing. 80% of that 1,000 has come in positive cases for off campus students just since ISU has been back for the school year in the last 2 weeks. If my math is correct, we've had 24 weeks since mid-March when all of this began and when our testing began and we started following this. So in 2 weeks, we have picked up 1,023 new cases from ISU students, which represents about 56%, over half of the entire cases that we've had in McLean County over the course of 24 weeks. It is no surprise to anybody what this effort is focused on and what the intent is with this and who it is aimed for. And as council members and as the town of Normal, I believe it is our responsibility to protect our businesses, to help them, to help their employees maintain their jobs and their livelihood, to stay open and to continue serving our community. And frankly, this population that we're addressing here with this ordinance today really has the greatest likelihood of putting at risk our local economy for all of us. So I think that this effort is responsible, is proactive, and I'm glad to see that we are taking this stand to help our local businesses and those who work for them. Thanks.
Ms. Lorenz.
There I am. Okay, thank you very much. Listening to all of this, I think it's pretty clear what we're talking about here, who it's for, as Mr. Preston said. And on that note, I would respectfully like to call the question.
We have a motion to call the question. Mr. Day, I think we need 5 votes to do that. Is that correct?
You do. The motion requires a second.
Second.
There we go. And 5 votes, correct?
Correct.
Please call the roll.
Mr. McCarthy,
Aye.
Ms. Cummings,
Aye.
Mr. Nord,
Nay.
Ms. Smith,
You're on.
Ms. Smith, you're muted.
No.
Mrs. Lorenz,
Aye.
Mr. Preston,
Aye.
Mayor Kus,
Aye. On the general ordinance, please call the roll.
Ms. Cummings,
Aye.
Mr. Nord,
No.
Ms. Smith,
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz,
Aye.
Mr. Preston,
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy,
Aye.
Mayor Kus,
Aye, the ordinance is approved. Item 6 is an ordinance requiring seating restrictions and other COVID-19 safety measures for on-premises liquor establishments. Motion for approval.
Move approval.
Second.
Is there discussion on this item? Mr. Nord.
Is this something that's already covered by the governor's executive orders?
I will ask him, excuse me, Mayor, I'm sorry to interrupt. I was going to ask Mr. Day to explain how this proposed ordinance is reconciled or complements with the current state regulations.
This closes a loophole that we've seen, got complaints about it from some of the establishments. Under the state guidelines, the tables have to be 6 feet apart and properly socially distanced. There's no requirement though under the state law that people have to be seated at those seats. So while you may have the table 6 feet apart, if people are all just standing there, not seated at the table, then you run into issues with the large crowds of people who are not properly socially distancing. And typically in a bar restaurant type situation, they're eating and drinking and not wearing their masks at that time. There is a requirement of 25% of standing area capacity. So, so if you have a specific area where people could stand, then standing there is limited to 25%. Quite frankly, nobody really knows what that means or how that would be enforced. So this will help us close a loophole in what we think is in the enforcement of the state regulations.
So is this something that was introduced by the businesses that had the problem?
No, I can respond and Mr. Day can supplement. This wasn't an ordinance that was introduced by businesses. We became aware of it because the city of Champaign adopted this ordinance. We believed that the ordinance contained value to us and helped address some concerns that we had. And as Mr. Day mentioned, some loopholes or maybe some misunderstandings. And so we think this does address a need.
All right, but we have no current problem.
That's your
Is that
opinion.
right? Okay. Have any complaints come in regarding this from local residents or from local business owners?
Yes, from local residents. I've had multiple complaints from local residences about lack of social distancing in establishments that served alcohol.
Okay, I hope that those are available for the public to review. Another question then, where's the funding going to come for the enforcement and for any legal costs should someone decide to take this to court? Is there case law, or are we going to be creating and spending the money to create this case law?
Well, I certainly don't believe we are creating any case law. In regard to any ordinances that we might be issuing, that is like any other ordinance violation that is covered by our current legal staff, and they address ordinance violations all the time. In regard to enforcement, this enforcement of this ordinance will be address like enforcement of any other ordinance. So it would be with current staff. Police department responds to numerous calls for service regarding parties, especially in the last couple of weeks. We have been responding. We will continue to respond in this particular ordinance. Oh, I'm sorry, wrong ordinance. This is the liquor establishment ordinance. So generally, though, on a complaint basis, if there's a violation, the police department would be one of the first to respond. Not unlike, I would say, a complaint of underage consumption, perhaps. So we have staff on prepared and able to respond for the enforcement end. In regard to legal, we would address the fines accordingly. And in regard to case law, I don't believe that's a risk. I'll let Mr. Day address any risk we might be addressing concerning case law.
This falls well within our home rule police powers, particularly when it comes to liquor regulation. We've got broad regulatory powers. So if somebody were to challenge it, I feel confident that we would be in a very good defensible position.
Okay, because there have been other local municipalities that their law enforcement has used that as a reason not to ask them to enforce things like this. So I just wanted to put that out there on the record. Then we're putting the burden of enforcement on the business. The patrons, if the patrons are not following this rule, then the burden and the fine goes to the business. Is that correct?
They've got the primary enforcement authority. The fines can go to either the establishment or to patrons. If the patrons refuse to comply with the requirements set out by the establishment, then the patrons themselves would be subject to the fine rather than the business.
Okay.
And just to supplement, we have been called to businesses since March addressing issues of customers not complying with the direction that the business leadership has been asking of some customers. So this falls right in alignment with what we've been doing.
And I will add that as a small business person that there are numerous municipal regulations that govern my business that I'm required to enforce, fire protection being one, in the sense that there's an added burden on a business owner. There are ordinances and regulations that we as businesses have to follow and enforce.
Sure. Is the town council, are we members of the Liquor Commission?
Yes.
Okay, then section 7 of this says that members of the Liquor Commission or authorized agents, we have the authority to determine whether an unsafe environment exists, and that we can then request security footage from that business. That, I think, allows for abuse and for other purposes. Any one of us could go into a business and request to see their security footage, the way that this is written. Mr. Day, do you have any response to that? Am I reading that correctly? Because this is in section 7.
What's up here?
While he's looking at that, I think that is a typo. And it should have said liquor commissioner, not commission. And
so that leaves it up to the mayor that he can go in and do this.
If you would look at state liquor law, that the liquor commission is advisory to the liquor commissioner, and any decision regarding liquor laws are at the discretion of the liquor commissioner. And in most communities, that's the mayor.
Okay,
and that is an authorized agent. Yeah, that is an authorized agent of the Liquor Commission, not the liquor commissioners themselves. So if we are doing certain enforcement actions, sometimes we do liquor audits. So that may be police or other town staff that are doing liquor audits. They'd be doing those as agents of the Liquor Commission. So those are generally just our liquor enforcers. It wouldn't be the members of the town council.
Okay, so does this need to be rewritten?
No.
Okay, because the way that I read it says that we can. You know, it says that any enforcement officer or official. And
If the liquor
we are officials.
commission, if the liquor commission, any authorized agent of the normal liquor control commission. So if the liquor commission were to authorize yourselves, I suppose, to go and enforce this, then that would be as agents, enforcement agents, then that would be the case, but I doubt you're going to do that.
Are we the Liquor Control Commission?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so then by default, we have that authority already granted to us. So I think this.
No, Mr. Nord, Mr. Days addressed that. You would have to determine yourselves as authorized agents or select an authorized agent, which historically has been the enforcement arm of our liquor code.
How can we not be, then I'm confused. How can we be the normal Liquor Control Commission and not be authorized?
It's very similar to your role as a council member, Mr. Nord, that if 4 or 5 of you decided that you wanted to make yourself enforcement arms of this and took a vote, I don't know, Mr. Day, you'd have to weigh in on that. But this ordinance does not give any one person on the Liquor Commission authority to be an agent.
And that's authorized for the purposes of the enforcement of this ordinance.
Okay.
Right. In terms of going out and issuing an ordinance violation or things like that, that would not occur by any of you. That would, the enforcement arm would be as we defined earlier, the normal police department.
Okay, then section 9 says that the president may issue an order or suspend or terminate this ordinance. So he can do that.
Well,
one person can do it.
This would be comparable to the last ordinance where I indicated we've put a sunset provision on this particular law, that it doesn't exist anymore effective January 1, 2021, or the mayor, president of the Board of Trustees, also known as, has the authority to rescind this earlier than January 1, 2021, if we deem it appropriate. So
I understand that, but section 9, it says the president, comma, and then it starts again, may issue an order. So can he issue
to suspend
an order to suspend? Okay.
In order
So then it's the
to
same
repeal, right, it's an order to, the mayor would, if we believe that it's appropriate, issue an order to suspend this law. And it would then terminate prior to January 1, 2021.
And is this more restrictive than what the governor has in place?
I think we just asked that question earlier.
So it is. Oh, I asked it on the last ordinance too.
You just asked it on this ordinance, as I recall.
In terms of it being more restrictive, Mr. Nord, we explained that it complements and fills some gaps that we believe exist in some of the current state regulations.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Preston.
Thanks, Mayor. So I'm looking at this ordinance in the same vein as I did our last one, and my comments that I said earlier about the responsibility that we have and what I believe the intent of this ordinance is. It has a lot of value and frankly a lot of importance to our public health. The one question I have with this, unless something has changed recently with their planning, I was under the understanding that Illinois State University, through their Redbirds Return Plan, as they have put together kind of an outline of how the university is responding to this pandemic, discussed and had decided, at least for a while, that after their fall break and Thanksgiving break, which is that week of Thanksgiving, after that point, no classes would resume in person and all would be online. Is that still accurate to our knowledge as of today?
I wasn't sure if the mayor was going to respond. It is my understanding that that is accurate. We chose to write the ordinance with the January 1st date to cast a wide net just in case situations change. And then of course, if things get better or if, numbers improve, if students, Illinois State University students go home early and the university closes for the semester on schedule, or maybe even prior to that, I don't know what their plans would be by the time we get to that date, then certainly the mayor has flexibility to rescind this ordinance.
Okay, thanks. Seeing as that is, I believe the primary intent of this is aimed toward making sure that our university student population doesn't impact negatively, disproportionately the safety of the entire community. I would question if it would be wise of us to look at putting a sunset date on this as that November 20th, which would be the date after which all classes for ISU would be online only. We would still cover the entirety of the time that our university students are here, but that would allow our restaurants just slightly more accommodation in making responsible decisions for their specific instances thereafter and going into the holidays, especially at a time when our student population is expected to be home, at least at this point, and not here in Normal and not in the community. So I don't know if I would offer that up as an amendment, but I guess for now I would just throw that out there and may come back to that as an amendment depending on if there are other comments on that issue. Thanks.
Mr. Preston, it's a good point that you raised, but the intention of this ordinance is not as oriented towards a student population as it is a population that would go to these establishments. So it's broader based than just a younger population, because as we know, there are lots of facilities that cater to people of all ages. And I will say a lot of these businesses are doing the right thing already. So they're not, in a sense, they're not being penalized for this because they're already doing it for the most part. This is to give us some teeth for businesses that might not do this, and just make it clear what the expectation is for social distancing in a very social environment, a restaurant or a bar situation. Mr. McCarthy.
Thanks, Mayor. Building off, I guess, of some of those comments and some general ones, like Mr. Preston, I generally have the same view of this, of protecting our economy, protecting our businesses. Again, our positivity rate is what it is, and we've seen the governor act in a region that has a positivity rate similar to ours. And so I think it's incumbent upon us to act. I think that certainly, although I haven't been out a lot in the community, I've certainly been in some establishments outside to see some of the problems that we're hearing about. I'm certainly hearing about from residents about density. I think what this does is help give specific, clear guidance to our local establishments about what we're expecting to try to keep everybody safe and to try to keep us out of phase 3 so they aren't further hurt by what's going on currently. I think by being specific and closing this loophole, it's going to make it easier for them to track indoor capacities, which is hard if people are up and moving around to really know and be able to count actually how many people are in their establishments. It is short term, and it does give responsibility to both the patrons and the business owner. About the comment about putting responsibility on the business, any business that has a liquor license already has responsibility. Any liquor license holder that has gaming already has responsibility. If they are not enforcing the liquor laws, they will lose their license and suffer a penalty. Responsibility on business owners is not new. Let me repeat, responsibility of business owners is not new. This is not news. Responsibility for patrons is not new either, right? And so what we're doing is trying to help stem a phase 3 return, protect our businesses so they don't suffer by returning to more stringent rules on them, as we just saw the governor do yesterday. And it's giving very, very clear guidance. I think this is short term. Mayor, if I'm hearing you right, you'll consider, if things change, the opportunity to suspend this, depending on what our community numbers are and the like. I see you're shaking your head. I'm sure you'll speak to that directly now that I've brought it up. But that there is a specific, we're talking 120 days here. That's, if you count on the calendar, it's 120 days. That's all we're talking about here. It has a short duration, sunset, which I'm a favor of, and gives responsibility to both business owners and customers, and gives clear guidance for what we're expecting to de-densify. Then I think this is something I can get behind for now.
And to your point, Mr. McCarthy, a decision like that coming from me would not be unilateral. It would be with the advice and consent of the council. Ms. Lorenz.
Okay, thank you. You know, I want to come back to the point that has been raised a couple of times here about our role in all of this. And frankly, Mr. Nord, I'm a little disappointed that, you know, you kind of are a resident watchdog, right? And I think you revel in that role, and it's a good role for you, and it's a good role for a group to have a devil's advocate, so to speak. But I'm really surprised that you're kind of rolling over on this one and not seeing the public health issue and the economic issue that this really is. And so on those issues alone, that's why we're acting. Okay? In the words of another mayor and another college community, he wrote, or it was written about him, and quoted something to the effect of, the spike in campus could threaten the city's healthcare system and local economy, which is heavily dependent upon student population. You could apply those words to Normal, Illinois. That happened to come from the mayor of Tuscaloosa, Alabama, at the University of Alabama, which is one of many institutions also struggling with this. So to say that we don't have a role in this is shirking our responsibilities as stewards and trustees of this community. So I want to make that crystal clear that we do have a role. The other point I want to make crystal clear is that we need to work in tandem with the university. And I think that's their expectation of us, to work in tandem with them, to have their back. And I think that's a lot of what we're doing here on both of these ordinances, is we're having their back. And I just really believe that this is something that we do have a role in. We need to step up and take action. And quite honestly, I'm doing that because I believe so much and I want to fight so hard for the businesses in this community, because I want to see them here this time next year. I want them to be here this time next summer. And I go and name them by name, but that might not be fair because I won't remember them all. But think of your favorite 1 or 2 places to go have your cup of coffee, or to enjoy a locally brewed beer. I want those places here, and that's why we're acting. So to say that out of you know, some sense of, oh, I don't know what to do, I'm not a doctor. No, we aren't doctors, but we do have a role in this today. So that is my plea for both of these ordinances. And as far as the timing, I understand to some extent why the December 31st. I believe it is so much of our role that I would like to and plan to, if we don't otherwise amend it here tonight, stay in touch with the mayor and staff on this and check in another 30 days, especially as fall begins to roll in and as the cooler temps. And maybe by then things have changed within the student population. I personally plan in my role as a council member to stay very engaged on this. That's how much I believe that this is our role. I support the amendment, the ordinance.
And Mr. Nord.
Thank you. I'd like to take a point of personal privilege since my name was mentioned. I respect the division of power within our government and the checks and balances. And we have a public health department who is supposed to take care and look at health related issues. They have the experts. This council has said many a time in the past that we should rely on the experts that give us information and their opinions. And in this case, you know, we're making a decision instead of letting the health department make that decision and guide us. Also, another concern that I have is a lot of the comments have been that we're trying to address issues because of students and control students and because of ISU and, you know, the students. Well, I'm not a legal scholar, but, you know, we represent everyone in the town, and every decision we should make should be for everyone in the town. And, you know, I don't know, we'd have to ask Mr. Day, if us making these rules that are just essentially to control students puts us in some sort of legal jeopardy. I do not know that answer, but that's a comment, and it's not going to change my vote, but thank you.
Mayor Kus, if I could say that staff would never present to council an ordinance that would put the organization in legal jeopardy, just to be clear. I'm pretty sure we've addressed that in the past, but for this particular issue, we are very well aware that the town of Normal does not discriminate against student status. Mr. Day has already addressed the issue on who these particular ordinances are applicable to. They apply to everyone within the town of Normal. You could be a resident of another community and in Normal and still subject to these rules and perhaps a fine if you're violating the rules. So yes, the campus area has been defined on your previous ordinance. We also indicated that it also applies to multiple family dwelling units because of problem situations that we are trying to address. In this particular ordinance, it applies to establishments with liquor licenses, and it would apply to every patron. We have not discriminated against a student population.
Mr. McCarthy.
Yeah, I just want to follow up on a couple of things. Several of my council counterparts and myself have said we're doing this on behalf of our economy and all of the residents of Normal. Just for anybody watching, that point's been made by several people. And so to say that this is just about students is just ignoring everybody's comments already. I guess the last thing I want to say is to the point that we shouldn't do anything because it's somebody else's job comment. I think is irresponsible. There are many bodies and agencies that have responsibility and purview to do something about it. Because somebody else hasn't done something means the town council should sit on our hands and do nothing, I think is irresponsible. We have the ability and the authority to proact to try to protect our community members and our business owners. And that's what we're doing here tonight. We're being proactive to protect our community about spread of a deadly virus and to help protect our economy before the governor puts us backwards, which puts more restrictive rules in place on our businesses, hurting them further. That is what this is. Sitting on our hands and saying somebody else should be doing this is a vote to not support our community, and it's irresponsible in my mind. Thank you. And I'd like to call a question if we're not.
I think everybody's made their comments. Ms. Hockford, please call the roll.
Mr. Nord,
No.
Ms. Smith,
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz,
Aye.
Mr. Preston,
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy,
Aye.
Ms. Cummings,
Aye.
Mayor Kus.
Aye. The ordinance is approved. Could I have a motion for adjournment, please?
So moved.
Moved.
Please call
Second.
the roll.
Ms. Smith,
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz,
Aye.
Mr. Preston,
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy,
Aye.
Ms. Cummings,
Aye.
Mr. Nord,
Aye.
Mayor Kus.
Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you.